Need some spicy Time Spiral Remastered reprints, maybe some cool old border cards? Well, you can pre-order Time Spiral Remastered now from our sponsor Card Kingdom by heading over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Time Spiral Remastered spoilers. And today, we get a bunch more red cards. They came in later yesterday, early this morning, and the start of Green Day, which means we actually got a lot of sweet stuff to talk about. So we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new Time Spiral Remastered reprints. And first off today, we got a green mythic, and you probably saw this one coming, the return of Tarmogoyf. And it is fair to say that Tarmogoyf isn't quite what it used to be. There was a time when Tarmogoyf was the card we needed reprinted most. If you go back to the old days of Modern, where Jund was like the best deck and not the laughing stock it is today. Sorry, Jund fans. No, don't unsubscribe. Click that like button. But if you go back a few years, Tarmogoyf was absurdly expensive. It was like $200 at some points, and one of the most important creatures in Modern. Today, Tarmogoyf, it's still a solid $40, $50 card after being reprinted a bunch of times, and even though it's not 2015, where Jund was the best deck in Modern, it still is a card that sees play. It sees play in Jund still, even if Jund isn't quite the best deck anymore. It sees play in some Death Shadow decks in Modern. It sees play across formats as well. If you go back to Legacy, it shows up in Delver decks, a few different varieties of Delver decks, and Tarmogoyf, its last bastion of dominance, is actually Vintage of all places. You think of Vintage as this super unfair format, but it's actually the format where Tarmogoyf is most important right now. The number one creature showing up in Oko-driven, like Bant and Sultai, mid-rangey creature style decks. It's just a really good, really big threat that comes down early in the game. So even though Tarmogoyf isn't quite the $200 card it used to be, it's still a really solid reprint, and we can always use more of them. We can always use the price to be lower. So even though it's not quite original Modern Masters Tarmogoyf reprinting when it was $200, still a solid $40, $50 mythic to open your packs, and one you're going to hope to hit. Next on our list, we have Heartwood Storyteller, which is a card that I actually didn't realize has some value. Heartwood Storyteller, it's like $10, $11 as a rare. Makes it so whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, each of that player's opponents draws a card, and I was surprised because this card doesn't really see play. It's in like 1% of Commander decks, according to EDH Rec, mostly in group hug style decks where you're letting everyone draw, kind of nice, people maybe will give you some political favors or something. But the reason this card is expensive is because it only has one printing back in original Time Spiral block. So this is one of those cards that, yes, it's an $11 rare today, but I would not be surprised if, based on the small amount of play it sees and based on the supply increasing thanks to Time Spiral Remastered, if this one ends up close to a bulk rare when all is said is done. So if you open it, either use it or try to trade it away quick before the price drops. We also got the return of Life and Limb, which isn't the most powerful card, making all your forests and saplings into 1/1 saplings and forests, although it is kind of infamous because there's a draw the game combo with Spore Mound. So if you don't want to win the game, but just want to try to draw the game, you play Life and Limb, you play Spore Mound, you play anything, essentially a sapling or a land, and that's going to serve this loop where you're going to make a sapling, which is a forest because of Life from Limb, which will trigger Spore Mound to make another sapling forest, which triggers Life and Limb. The problem is it's just snowballs until the game ends in a draw, unless someone can stop it, so doesn't actually win you the game, but it is kind of cute. The only other place Life and Limb sees the tiniest bit of play is in some sapling-based commander decks, Slimefoot, Felon, but really, it's not even a staple there, and it's only like a $3 card. So janky, fun against the odds style card, but not one with a ton of real ramifications for Constructed. We also got Glittering Wish, which is a really cool card, tutoring for a multicolor card from your sideboard. Unfortunately, you can't play Wishes in Commander because you can't get cards from your sideboard because you don't have sideboards, which means there's just not a lot of places to play Glittering Wish. It's shown up in random Modern decks from time to time. The only place it really sees play right now is in Jeskai Ascendancy, which is definitely like a tier 3 Modern deck, not a staple of the format, but lets you grab your Jeskai Ascendancy or other combo pieces from the sideboard. So sweet to see it returning. It is a card that is powerful enough that when the right deck comes along, it is really good, it is really playable. We're just not in a place where there is too many decks like that right now. So like a $3 reprint, but yeah, might as well get more of them out there. Cut off any future price increases, because as a 2-mana Wish, it definitely is costed in a way where this could develop into a staple sooner or later in some format. Sticking with rares from the main set, we also got Magus of the Moon, and Magus of the Moon, not quite Blood Moon, but close enough. Blood Moon in creature form, and even though it's been reprinted a couple times fairly recently, still like a $20 card. So most decks prefer Blood Moon to Magus of the Moon, but there are a couple of reasons that Magus of the Moon actually sees a lot of play. One is it shows up as Blood Moons 5, 6, 7, and 8 in decks like Mono Red Prison. Sadly, no longer in Modern, thanks to Simian Spirit Guide, which also just got reprinted with amazing new art being added to the format. But in Legacy, you'll see decks have like 6 Blood Moons and like 2 or 3 Magus of the Moons or something, trying to play them on turn 1 off of Simian Spirit Guide and Ancient Tombs. The other reason that decks might prefer Magus of the Moon to Blood Moon is if you have creature synergies. It is a Blood Moon that you can hit with Collected Company, or tutor out with Chord of Calling, or find with your Winota Joiner of Forces. So certain decks that care heavily about creatures are willing to go with Magus of the Moon over Blood Moon, even though Blood Moon is much harder to kill. Like Magus of the Moon, the problem is it dies to a Lightning Bolt or a Path to Exile or whatever, so it's not nearly as hard of a lock as Blood Moon. But if your deck cares about creatures, can tutor out creatures, then Magus of the Moon can actually be a better Blood Moon, which is why it's still like a $20 card based on Legacy and Modern demand, even though it's been reprinted. So one of the rares you're definitely looking to open in Time Spiral Remastered. We also got Boom Bust, which isn't super expensive, but it is a card that has seen an increase in play lately. So one side you get a 6-mana Armageddon, which 6 mana is a lot for an Armageddon. The other side is as close as you can get in Modern to Sinkhole. Yes, you gotta blow up one of your lands along with your opponent's lands, but Modern decks have found ways to turn this into a real Sinkhole. Like for example, the most popular place to play Boom Bust right now is in Boros Prison, where you're playing like Cascading Cataracts, an indestructible land. You're playing Flagstones of Trokir, a land that gets you a land when it goes to the graveyard. If you have Cascading Cataracts on turn 1 into a mountain on turn 2, you literally turn Boom Bust into a Sinkhole in Modern, which makes it really powerful. Same with Flagstones of Trokir. The other trick, and we haven't seen this as much lately because it's a little slower, is fetch lands. The way that Boom is worded, you can target your fetch land and one of your opponent's non-fetch lands, and then sack your fetch land with Boom on the stack. The spell's not going to fizzle because it has 2 targets. Your opponent still goes down a land. You're fine because you get the land that you fetch out with your fetch land. So Boom Bust, only worth a few dollars, but still a good reprint, which is on the rise in Modern recently compared to how much play it used to see. We also got Sedge Sliver, which is kind of an expensive sliver. One of the upsides of Time Spiral Remastered is it's the perfect home to reprint all these slivers. Sedge Sliver, it used to see a little bit of play in like 5-color slivers in Modern, even though it's kind of fallen off there. Since we got Modern Horizon slivers, a lot more options, it's kind of fallen out of favor. It still sees play in Commander sliver decks. If you're playing Sliver Tribal with Sliver Overlord, First Sliver, Sliver Queen, Sedge Sliver is probably going to be in your deck as a lord that can also let your stuff reanimate, and that means it's still like an $8 card or something, so the price will probably come down a bit, but players love slivers. They love slivers in Commander, so this is one of those cards that, yes, it'll drop at reprinting, but I expect it to rebound because players just really like slivers. We also got Greater Gargadon, one of my personal favorite creatures. Greater Gargadon, it's a weird creature. 9 mana, 9/7, that's horrible. Suspend for 10 for 1 mana, that's way too long for a game of Modern. The trick is you can sack an artifact creature land to remove time counters from it, which makes it one of the best creatures in a very specific archetype, which is Restore Balance, also being reprinted, one of my favorite decks in Modern. And the idea is you suspend Greater Gargadon, and then you could use like a Cascade spell or As Foretold to cast Restore Balance, and then with Restore Balance on the stack, you sacrifice all of your lands, and then your opponent's going to have to sacrifice all their lands, but in theory, you got As Foretold, so you can still cast spells, or maybe you got some Border Posts to make mana, so you can still cast spells, and then your Greater Gargadon's going to come off suspend, and that's your finisher too, giving you a 9/7 that's going to close out the game since your opponent has no creatures, no lands, probably no hand as well. So even though Greater Gargadon isn't worth very much and kind of only goes in exactly one deck, it's still a reprint that excites me because the one deck it goes in is one of my favorites. We also got a handful of bulk rares. Pact of the Titan, the least played of the pack cycle. Moraganda Petroglyphs, nailed it. Never really seen play outside of Against the Odds. Fungus Sliver, not a bad sliver for a sliver deck, but been reprinted a bunch of times, so it's only worth a couple of bucks. So, rounding out the set, relevant for limited maybe, but not stuff you're going to really hope to open from a value perspective. Moving on to the world of old border cards. Oh, do we have some hits? Young Pyromancer, yes, originally just a random uncommon, but this card sees a ton of play across formats. It is a staple in Dreadhorde Arcanist decks in Historic. It's a staple in Delver decks, in Legacy, in Modern. It shows up in Mardu Pyromancer decks with Lingering Souls. So Young Pyromancer sees a ton of play in older formats, gonna be in demand in the old border. Also sees some commander play, where if you're playing a Spellslinger style deck like Burgi or Niv or Kaikar, might as well throw it in because you're casting a bunch of instant sorceries anyway, so you get a bunch of tokens which, chump block bigger creatures, maybe go on the offensive. So Young Pyromancer, probably going to be a little bit expensive in old border because it does see a lot of play across formats. We also got Lava Spike, which does exactly one thing, which is be one of the best burn spells in every format. If you look at a deck like Modern Burn or Legacy Burn, Lava Spike is always in the deck because what do burn decks want? They want 3 damage for 1 mana. That is kind of the going rate. And even though Lava Spike has the drawback of not hitting creatures, if your main plan is to throw damage at your opponent's face, Lava Spike is essentially as good as a lightning bolt in that scenario, which means it always shows up in burn decks, always worth a few dollars, even though it gets reprinted a bunch because burn is a great intro deck. Tons of players play it. It's one of the best budget decks across formats like Legacy and Modern, so there's always demand for this card. So I expect Lava Spike, again, originally a common, probably going to be pretty expensive and spectacular looking in old border. We also got a handful of old border cards which are pretty clearly focused on commander players. Vandal Blast, number 3 red card in the format, essentially a red ultra staple. If you're playing a red deck, you just play Vandal Blast because blowing up all of your opponent's artifacts for 5 mana is amazing, doesn't even hurt your stuff. A tally might not look that exciting, but if you actually look at the most played red cards in commander, it's the number 2 creature. Dockside Extortionist, number 1, because that card's busted, but Itali is actually a top 10 red card in the format, the second most played creature, because it draws you cards and it lets you cast them for free, which is really powerful. The same thing is essentially true of the green old border cards. Beast Whisper, top 25 green card. Green stacks have lots of creatures, so it's an easy way that you can just generate card advantages, especially good in elf decks because it's an elf or druid decks. And then Rexage, I know it's an elf, and you will play it in every commander elf deck, but this is, I believe, the number 2 non-ramp card in the format. Eternal Witness is number 1. Rexage is number 2 as far as green cards that are not ramp spells. So Rexage, it breaks out beyond elf decks, and it's a card that you can just play in every green deck because it's efficient, you can blink it, it blows up artifacts and enchantments. It's a really powerful commander card. So a suite of solid commander all-stars coming in old border for the first time. We also got Past in Flames, which is kind of one of the best payoffs for storm decks. In every format, it's available, and being able to flash back all your instants and sorceries is really powerful. Its most common home, I would say, is Modern Storm, where Modern Storm, it's built around making your stuff cheaper with stuff like Old Border Brawl, Gifts Ungivening to get Past in Flames, and then Past in Flames to flash back your Gifts Ungiven and your other stuff to get enough Storm count to win the game. But it also shows up in Legacy decks, Ad Nauseam Tendrils, plays it for similar reasons to the Modern deck, letting you recast all your rituals and card draw from the graveyard, and it shows up in Commander Spellslinger / Storm decks, Burgi, Zada, Kess, where if you get a big graveyard and you want to sling a bunch of spells, Past in Flames is really great there. So really exciting and looks really amazing in old border. We also got Bedlam Reveler, which is an old border card that has pretty much one home. It shows up in the prowess decks in Modern, a little bit in Legacy burn style decks too, I think, but mostly Modern prowess shells, where you play your Soulscar mages, your storming entities, you chain together a bunch of spells, and then if things go wrong, Bedlam Reveler often comes down for 2 mana to refill your hand and give you a big prowess threat. So Modern players are gonna love this one for their decks. We also got another commander card in Feldon of the Third Path. So Feldon, as a commander, it's kind of medium popularity. I think it's the 8th most played red commander. So it does see play as a commander, but really it's kind of a staple in the main decks of a lot of decks. Decks that can use its ability to make a token from the graveyard for 1 turn, either because they're getting things in the graveyard, like you Perfrost a creature into play, it's going to sacrifice, and Feldon can give you a copy of it. That's really good. Or decks like Obeka that can keep that token around. So even though Feldon isn't an all-star as the leader of a commander deck, it does show up a ton in the 99 of commander decks, which makes it a really solid old border reprint. We also got Zealous Conscripts, and I'm hyped about this for one reason. Yes, Zealous Conscripts does see some commander play. Yoinking the best thing on the battlefield for a turn, pretty good. There's also combo potential, but the main reason I'm excited about this is actually limited. Thanks to the combo of Zealous Conscripts and Kiki-Jiki, it's now possible to go infinite with just old border cards in Time Spiral Draft. If you've never seen it, Kiki-Jiki Zealous Conscripts, it's a combo. You got Zealous Conscripts, that gains control of Kiki-Jiki to untap it, then you do it again, and you get infinite Zealous Conscripts, and then you beat everyone. So if you can get lucky enough to open both of these in your old border slots, you can actually pull off this mono-red infant combo in Draft, which is absolutely hilarious. So sweet for commander, but even more exciting for janky combo limited potential. Rounding out our old border red cards, we got a couple of meh options, like Molten Rain. It sees a bit of play in modern, but not gonna be super expensive. Teamer Battle Rage, good at janking people out with one big Death Shadow attack or a Kiln Fiend attack, but still, I wouldn't expect this to be one of the more expensive old border cards, but they do look really good, especially the Molten Rain. We also got some sweet old border green ramp spells. Farseek, commander stable, just don't play it in your mono green decks like Richard. Elvish Mystic shows up in commander decks, but also other formats as well. It gives us another old border 1-mana mana dork to play alongside Llanowar Elves and Elves decks, which is really sweet. Going to be relevant for a bunch of different formats: Legacy, Modern, Pioneer. In commander, Elvish Mystic shows up in a couple of different types of decks. One is Elf Tribal. Like, Elf Tribal wants all the mana dork elves, so if you're playing something like Lathril, old border Elvish Mystic will fit right in. The other home is decks that just really care about creatures. If you're playing like Edric or Toski, which reward you for having a bunch of creatures for drawing cards, playing Elvish Mystic as your ramp spell, even over the Cultivates and Kadama's Reaches of the world, which are typically better, is usually a good choice. So that's another reason Elvish Mystic is important. Also, kind of a staple in the Pioneer format, where it shows up alongside Llanowar Elves in what I would consider one of the foundational archetypes of the format, which is play a 1-mana mana dork into a powerful 3-drop. And that 3-drop is sometimes Jade Light Ranger, sometimes Lovestruck Beast, sometimes Goblin Rabblemaster. Doesn't really matter, but in Pioneer, 1 into 3 is kind of what the format's about a lot of the time. Also, an elf stable shows up in modern elves alongside Shaman in the pack, a little bit in legacy elves where Gaia's Cradle gives you even more mana. So Elvish Mystic, great old border reprint, even though it's originally a common. We also got Become Immense, which is probably the old border card that I've died to most on this list. Become Immense shows up pretty much one place, which is Infect decks in modern and legacy, where giving a Blighted Agent, Inkmoth, Glister Elf +6/+6 means any single other pump spell in your deck is probably going to be lethal. It opens up some really fast kills, especially in formats where fetch lands can fill your graveyard to pay the delve cost. So a little shout out to Infect players, I guess. We also got, oh my goodness, Primeval Titan in the old border, looking spectacular. So Prime Time, a little bit weird card because it's banned in Commander, so you can actually play it in Commander, which means Primetime's main home is in Modern, where it shows up in Valakut decks, just like green-red Primeval Titan ramp decks, where Valakut and Primeval Titan are the finishers. Also kind of like combo Primeval Titan decks with Amulet of Vigor, trying to make a bunch of hasty Primeval Titans to win the game that way. So I expect Modern players are going to be all over this old border Primeval Titan, even though it is slightly awkward that it's banned in Commander, so a little bit less demand. It's still like a $10 mythic, even though it's been reprinted a ton of times. So I expect this old border version, and especially the foil old border version, to be pretty expensive, although maybe not quite as expensive as you think, because you're missing out on the Commander demand, and Commander is just such a massive driver of paper prices at this point. An old border card that probably will be pretty expensive, because it's not just legal in Commander, but one of the most important cards in Commander is Eternal Witness. Eternal Witness, the single most played non-ramp spell in green, and green, I believe, the most popular color in the Commander format. And the power of Eternal Witness is it doesn't just go in a specific deck or archetype. You can just take Eternal Witness and play it in literally any deck in the format, and it's going to be amazing. A little bit sad that we have the new art on it, which, I don't know, takes away a little bit from the classic feel. I would have loved to see an original Eternal Witness in the old border, but the new art is still pretty sweet, and it does look spectacular in the old border. We also got Ancient Stirrings, which is another old border card that I've died to a lot of times in Modern. So Age of Stirrings digs 5 cards deep for a colorless card. So snags lands and also literal colorless cards. It shows up in 2 decks primarily in the Modern format. First, and probably most infamously, it's a staple of Tron decks, where Ancient Stirrings is just dig 5 cards deep to find a Tron land, and if you don't find a Tron land, most of your good stuff's colorless. Like if you have Tron, it's finding your Ugin or your Karn or your Wormcoil or Walkie Ballista, so almost like a tutor, almost like a 1-mana tutor for Tron. Secondarily, really good in the Hardened Scales deck, where yes, it doesn't get Hardened Scales itself, but you can grab most of your key pieces, the Ozolith, Arcbound Ravager, Walking Ballista. Basically, 1-mana dig 5 card deep for the best cards in your deck is worth it in a lot of different decks. So Ancient Stirrings looks spectacular at Old Border, and I think probably going to be worth a pretty penny based on Modern and a bit of Legacy play. Otherwise, in the world of lower rarity cards, we got some decent reprints. Riftbolt, Grapeshot, Empty the Warrens, Ancient Grudge all see a lot of competitive play, so even though they're just commons, they're worth a little bit of money. So these are ones, if you open a box, you're going to want to set aside. They're not worth tons of dollars, but they might be worth $1 or $2. Probably less after being reprinted, but still, don't just mix them in with your bulk, because these are very playable cards. We also got a ton of just bulk cards in red that mostly there for limited. Some see a bit of constructed play like Conflagrate and Edge. Lightning Axe shows up in some graveyard decks. We also got a ton more slivers, which these are the random commons and uncommons, so not super expensive. But still, if you want to build Sliver Tribal, a box of Time Spiral Remastered is going to get you a long way there. As far as lower rarity green cards, Keen Sense, actually worth like $4, shows up in some Boggle decks. Might of Old Kroza, decent pump spell for Infect decks. A bunch of just random filler type stuff. More slivers, so again, if you want to build Sliver Tribal, Time Spiral Remastered, perfect set for you. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Time Spiral Remastered spoilers for today. So, what do you think about today's batch of cards? Is Tarmogoyf still exciting, even though it's been reprinted a whole bunch of times? What about the Old Border stuff? What Old Border card is at the top of your list today? Do you like the new Magus of the Moon art? How sad does it make you feel that Simian Spirit Guide gets amazing new art but is now banned in Modern so we can't Blood Moon people? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with more Time Spiral Remastered spoilers. So until then, everyone, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.